I'm Insomniac, and this is the Puredial Square Legacy.
Oh, yo!
Insomniac.
Alright, well, before I jump into this review, I'd like to give a big shout out to Jim Berry for sending this in. He has been providing most of the watches that I've been reviewing, so if anybody else would also like to join the fun and you have anything you'd like to see reviewed on the channel, email me at shouldItimethis@gmail.com, and I will let you know where to send the watches, and I'll review them and insure them and send them back. Alright, well, let's look at this interesting looking square watch piece by piece. The case on this watch is a polished tube television. I'm just getting right to the point with this one. If you're older than 25, you've had a TV in your house that looks just like this, maybe minus the giant clock inside. Not only is it square and 42 millimeters on each side, but if you look at it from the sides, you'll notice that it actually bevels out like an old TV screen. Really, the only thing about this case that doesn't remind me of a TV screen is the fact that it's polished. I don't know about you, but I haven't seen a polished tube television. The top of the case, I guess, the area that on most watches might be the bezel, I'll just call it the frame. It looks like a polished picture frame. The frame is too thick. Sadly, this is something that affects the design of the watch as a whole, as well as the wearability and functionality of the watch. If the frame weren't this thick, I feel that a large square dial would have actually been more exciting here, and if the frame weren't this thick, it would shave possibly a couple of millimeters off the height and width, which would make the piece more easily wearable. Side profile isn't bad. There's a slight angle at all four sides leading down to the back, which gives the case back a slightly smaller footprint than the case's large 42 millimeters. The sides of the case also have this curved crease on all four sides. Let's see if I can show it to you better. You can see it a little bit better there. I guess that's to break up the potential monotony of four large shiny slabs. Case back is kind of cool. It's actually held on with four small screws rather than being snapped on or screwed on, which on any non-square watch might come off gimmicky, but it works on a square watch. The case back is polished, has the name, brand logo, and series large towards the top, text about the watch's inspiration under that, and a couple specs towards the bottom. The lugs are short and stubby and end at an abrupt, almost cut-off style at the ends, but I really can't think of too much that would have been done instead here for the lugs other than a wire style, so whatever, I guess. The last piece of this case is probably the worst piece of this case, and that's the crown. The only nice thing I can say about the crown is that Puredial did go through the trouble of having their brand logo put on the face of the crown. Otherwise, it's so small that it looks like it doesn't go on this watch, and I complain sometimes about subpar grip on the crowns for setting the time and date. Well, this watch has zero. Literally none. Non-existent grip. Okay, sure, aesthetically I guess it could be argued that a smooth-sided crown flows better with the TV frame, case, but between the lack of any texture and the tiny diameter, the crown is hard to use, and that's an understatement. And if you thought that was all the things I could possibly dislike about this case, let me add one more. I don't know how they polish this case, or if it's coated with something, or what the deal is, but I've never seen another watch that collects fingerprints this easily, gets dirty so fast, or fogs up as often. And with the fogging, I'm talking about the case, luckily not the crystal. But either way, half the time when I look down at the watch, it looks dirtier, like 5 people were touching it after eating a bucket of chicken. It's pretty frustrating. If you were afraid that I wouldn't have anything nice to say about this watch, you're in luck, because the dial of this watch, minus one large component that we'll get to in a minute, is actually very nice. It's square, obviously, but there's a raised circular platform inside the square dial where you have 11 good-looking raised and angled hour markers. Why only 11? If you look at the hour marker at 5 o'clock, you'll notice what looks like some kind of small stains or something on the index. I've never seen something like that overlooked on a watch dial, but let's continue. The dial itself is done in a radial brushed finish, which not only looks solid, but it plays with the light really well depending on the angle at which you hold the watch, giving you everything from light grassy greens through dark forest greens. It's very nice. At the very outer edge of the dial, you have white applied minute markers, which are angled to accommodate the circular movement of the hands inside the square frame, and you have a simple, easy to read date window at 3 o'clock. Where this dial really comes up short is with the handset. First, the hands are too short for this style, especially given the fact that the dial is square and that the minute markers are against the square section as opposed to the raised circular section. It feels like the second hand and minute hand are a mile away from the markers at the outer edges when approaching the corners. Then there's the physical build of the hands. Your minute and hour hands are sword shaped, but the overall center bevel and outer edges look thin and cheap, and the second hand is just totally generic and uninspired. On top of that, the polished finish on the hour and minute hands just isn't the best quality, even to the naked eye. So the hands really blew a great opportunity for what could have been a really great dial inside this polished TV style frame. The only usable complication on this watch is the date at 3 o'clock. Black numeral on a white disc, which only matches because there's white lume filling inside the hands, and of course, on a cheap watch I wouldn't expect a custom green date disc or something like that, so this combination is fine. It's easy to read at a quick glance, the numeral on the disc is centered well inside the window, and it works. The lume on this watch is a sad story, starting with the simple fact that it just isn't very good. I actually thought that the white inserts weren't lume for the first few days I wore the watch, because when I'd go from a bright room outside into the dark, there was no glow at all. After charging the lume with a direct light source, it turns out that the white inserts are lume, but they're not very bright and they don't stay charged very long. But perhaps the worst part of the lume situation is the lack of any kind of lume-filled references on the dial other than inside the two hands. If you know how to tell time, you can generally figure out a rough idea of what time it is based on the position of two glowing sticks, but without some kind of reference on the dial itself, at the hour markers or even just at the 12, 3, 6, and 9, you're just guessing. The lume on this watch is basically useless. Time at a glance on this watch is good. Not perfect, but good. The hands have a good sharp tip to them, and the contrast between the hands and the dial along with the polished and white indices on the fairly dark dial work for finding the hands quickly. And without any clutter on the dial, it really is simple to read. The downside is what I discussed earlier, with the minute track being against the outer square edge of the dial, and the handset being shorter than it should be. You have to visually connect the tip of the minute hand with the minute indices when the hands are in any of the four corner areas, which makes it just a little bit harder to read the exact time quickly. Accuracy with this piece is what you'd expect from a Japanese quartz movement. Excellent. In the week that I observed this watch, there was basically no deviation from the compared time on my phone, so that's great. The one negative is the look of the movement. Second hand moves lazily and stops with a cheap looking springiness on many of the seconds, which hurts the overall perception of class or quality on this piece. The strap on this watch is okay. It's faux alligator patterned leather. The buckle is polished to match the case and has the brand name engraved into it. And it has a good taper from the lugs down to the ends. I also found the strap to be fairly comfortable while on the wrist. Where it loses points is in overall quality. Not only is it thin, which makes it feel kind of cheap, but Jim sent this watch in brand new. He's never worn it. And with just 1 week of light wear, I'm already seeing some creasing where I've buckled the watch onto my wrist, which tells me that this strap would wind up looking old and fairly used fairly quick. As of the time of this review, the MSRP of this watch on the Puredial site is $200, and if that were the actual selling price, I would just drop this thing in the garbage and apologize to Jim. But luckily that's not the actual price of this watch. I've seen it for sale on some sites between $58 and $99. The sub $100 price range is where this watch belongs, and I'm not saying that in a negative way necessarily. I'm actually saying that this is a comfortable purchase option, if you like the aesthetic of this watch, of course, for under $100. It's large and square, but if you want large and square, it's accurate, fairly well built, fairly unique, and it has a nice dial. So for somewhere under the $100 mark, it's not an exceptional value, but it does gain a point or two when you compare it to other large, square, TV style looking watches, because there aren't many of them. So again, if you like the aesthetic of this watch, $58 to $99, it's really not a bad price for this watch at all. Again, a big shout out to Jim. Thank you very much for sending this in, and for all of the other watches as well. Again, if you have anything you'd like to see reviewed, definitely contact me so somebody besides Jim can actually have something reviewed on the channel. And that's it. I'll see you all at the next one.